It all comes out.
Good afternoon, everyone. How is this sound system working?
Good.
Can you hear me in the back?
Closer to your mouth, maybe.
Closer to my mouth. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Good afternoon and welcome to the 2018 spring celebration of Valley Voices. With all this weather, I was going to tell everybody, give you kudos for coming in on this beautiful warm spring day, but it's still pretty chilly out there and it feels pretty good in here. Plus we've got food, good writing, and good company. It is very heartening and hard to believe that this is the 17th celebration of Valley Voices. I would like to thank the 3 women writers who started Valley Voices, because 2 of them are here, Jane Getty, Sue Clausen-Wicker, and Leslie Howard, who couldn't be with us today. I want to remind everyone here that we are a volunteer organization, and if you enjoy our programs, if you would like to see this program move forward, we need you. Just about anything you can offer, we'll take it. Because as time goes on, people get involved in other things, and we need some fresh blood. So if you look on the back of your program, you could email us at our email, or you can talk to some of the steering committee members that are here today, and if they would raise their hands now so you can see them. So you can talk to any of us, and we will hook you up. You know, it really does take a village to bring together these events. We have some thank yous. We'd like to thank our first readers, April Asbury, Jessica Muller, Rick Van Noy, and Bonnie Wynn. We are grateful to the Blacksburg Public Library for hosting us, the Lyric Theater for providing public service announcements, Richard Goff for video productions. Thank you for Shadow Lake Village, who always lends dishes and tablecloths, and the Community Arts and Information Office for coaching space. And we appreciate all those good souls who provide refreshments, setup, and cleanup, and of course the Valley Voices Steering Committee for planning and putting together this event. Cell phones. Now it's time to cut them off, if you haven't done so already. I just cut mine off a minute ago. And remember, no flash photography during the reading. I have a couple of announcements. The Artemis 2018 Literary Journal will be holding its annual launch festivities at the Roanoke Taubman Museum of Art on May 4th, starting at 7 p.m. The speaker will be New York Times author Sharon McCrum, who is a local author, as many of you know. And is Jerry here? I didn't see her come in. I think there may be tickets left, but you can find tickets if you go to www.artemisjournal.org and click on blog. The Friends of the Pulaski County Public Library are continuing their spring cleaning book sale. For those of us who still like paste and paper books, the sale includes hundreds of paperbacks, hardbacks, children's books, VCRs, and books by the late local Radford author Jess Carr, all for great prices, and it's beautiful to drive to Pulaski this time of year. The sale continues Saturday from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. at the book sale store across from the Pulaski Library. One of the reasons I treasure Valley Voices is because it provides such a unique and rich way of bringing people together. Ever since us humans began making characters and funny lines on papyrus or leaves or something, writing and reading has been a way to bring people together and help us understand one another. I think it's pretty magical that you can come in here and a person you've never met or maybe never even seen can read to you, and there can be a connection. You may resound with something in your own life or you may have an aha moment just from listening to the reader. We have a wonderful program for you this afternoon, so let's begin. Our first reader is Jeff Saperstein. After 30 years of teaching English at Radford University, Jeff Saperstein retired in 2015. His poetry draws on his anxieties, his many regrets, his sense of awe, bafflement, and, since November of 2016, daily disbelief. Jeff Saperstein, reading On the Stoop.
Thanks, Diane. This poem is set long before Brooklyn became a cool place to live. When I was growing up, Brooklyn was not cool. The Stoop. It's pebbled brick bit into your thighs when you sat on the top step that in-between hour before supper. The chrome-plated Avenue R bus ground back and forth, its exhaust mixing with the salt breeze coming down Ocean Ave. It was a corner stoop, so they came from all directions, humanity parading before your elevated perch. Yeshiva boys in their long overcoats, Catholic girls in plaid skirts, double-breasted suits, followed by Henry, the super from the building on East 16th, who was Hungarian, or was it Puerto Rican? Whether striding or ambling, they would not acknowledge you, never looked up. And you came to accept your anonymity, saw the virtue of the impersonal. This is where you first learned how to detach. The fine art of taking it all in, the coarse and the smooth, the sleek and the dull, with perfect equanimity. Thank you.
Our next writer is Andy Smith. Andy says that outside of being a father, which is the ultimate responsibility and joy of my life, everything else points to a focus on coaxing seedlings to become viable, productive plants on their own. And is that not also a metaphor for parenting? Had I to choose again an area of study at the age of 19, I would have gone into horticulture, and then I would have pursued a career as an ag extension agent to assist county citizens with plant projects, large and small. So it's no surprise that his poem is called Bee Balm Days, or Eurydice in Bloom. Andy Smith.
Thank you. So this poem takes its inspiration from the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, and some of you may know that Orpheus was a great poet and also supposed to be just superior on the lyre. And we also might remember that Orpheus is supposed to be bringing Eurydice up the precarious stairway from Hades, and he looks back even though he's been told that he may not do so or else the deal is off, and he does, and Eurydice falls away back into the shadows, back into Hades. And there are many versions of this myth, and what I'm doing today is a revisionist piece, and perhaps, maybe, just maybe, we are seeing Eurydice appear again, reincarnated. Bee Balm Days. Last week she traveled 100 miles, pedal to pedal, to taste the sweet of crabapple sap on her tongue. Drunk off floral fumes, sprawled in a drowse, she's nectar deep on a chicory bloom. A poet passing by, clips from the field some Queen Anne's lace to scent the summer house with wild carrot tails. He plucks the purple heart from one aerial head, and with it nudges her to catch her compound gaze. Look him in the eye. Winged and lithe, she hedge hops thorny hyssop, gallops over blackberry canes, lingers in scented ribbons of spring. She needs no lyre on her flower wind chime. Her legs tread the lavender current. She rides hive to heaven on yellow pollen streams. Thank you.
Our next writer and reader is Jane Getty. Jane is an associate editor of Artemis Journal, co-founder of Valley Voices, and a past fellow at the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts. She has published poetry, a book on teaching, and essays on diverse topics, professional, political, and narrative nonfiction. Her 300-page memoir, Confederate Union, is currently under review for publication. Jane Getty reading The Bridge.
Thank you, Diane, and thank you, all of you supporters of Valley Voices. It's a wonderful group. Diane is doing a fabulous job stepping in as coach and MC today, so thank you, Diane. I've just returned from a reunion with my 3 far-flung children and grandchildren. So the timing of reading this essay, which I wrote probably 6 months ago, is, I hope I read it okay. The Bridge. I'm trying to shed possessions. My 3 children live in 3 different places, all far away. My son is 11 years younger than his sisters, still traveling with a backpack, not yet settled into a career. My daughters have careers and children of their own. They struggle to balance checkbook, work, motherhood, and marriage, just as I once did. But technology has changed the equation. My daughters' work hours are longer and their vacations are shorter. In today's world, the 5 o'clock whistle never blows. While mothers race to small children left too long at daycare, work tags along like an invisible hitchhiker, dinging, lighting up, mutely shouting from the deep well of an oversized pocketbook. I wish I could liberate my children from these stresses, but I can't. And so the toys I had saved grow dusty on the shelves, awaiting the touch of a little hand, the smile of a little face. Hardest of all is the empty chair staring at me from the corner of my study. Today, sunlight from a wide window spills across that reading chair, as it did on Progress Street, when 2 little girls nestled close to my body, heads touching as they studied the pictures, and I read. I didn't set out to make a children's library. It just happened, book by book, over a lifetime of loving them, the children and the books. A long trail, a shining path from my childhood to theirs, across mountains and oceans, continents and rivers of time, every journey ending with a wordless smile, as old eyes meet young after crossing a bridge together. I could imagine magic carpets and children who outfoxed foxes once upon a time, but not a time without time. Not a world that squeezed so hard children couldn't visit grandmothers every summer. I'm struggling to say goodbye to expectations and things that hang from them, like Christmas decorations in August. I'm beginning the hard process of reconciliation, of emptying the home I made for children. I set a date with the painters and began filling boxes with books to give the library. Why keep those I've already read, I ask myself, or those I've had for years without reading? My eyes sweep across shelves searching for sacrificial lambs amongst the flock. It isn't easy. These books informed my life, seasoned me as a thinker, deepened my capacity for empathy. They reflect different times of my life, the voices I listened to, the ideas that quickened my pulse, the passages that inspired lust and longing. Not the South Americans, I gasp, as the heartless god of downsizing watches. When I discovered magical realism in the 1970s, it felt like finding my native tongue. Marquez and Amado, Fuentes and Allende took me to a land where the living and the dead walked side by side, so close enough to each other they could hear each other's thoughts. These people with sun-ripened skin and eyes dark as plum pits hold secrets, foolish dreams, and a wisdom I long to acquire. I watch characters feast and fight, amble home from the bars, lie together on heat-tired sheets. I see a woman so beautiful that one morning while hanging sheets in a clothesline, she ascends into heaven. Goodbye, old friends, I think, as I lower the South Americans into a box. Your abandonment is the cost of my liberation. As I am reminded each time I pass Uncle Glenn's careful calligraphy from Gibran, life goes not backward, nor tarries with yesterday. I'm entering the house of tomorrow by emptying this one. I reach for a book just the right size to fill a space left in this giveaway box, thinking only with the part of my brain that loads a dishwasher. I study the book's dimensions. There's nothing noteworthy about its cover, except that its edge has been cut away, telling me exactly where, when, and how this book came into my possession. 25 years ago, for 1 week, an abandoned big box store became a giveaway site for surplus books. They were all free. Like a kid in a candy store, I'd gorged myself on those free books, filling boxes without scrutiny, reason, or reflection. A mirror image of what I am doing today. Except for poetry and books written by friends or family, I intend to get rid of them all. So what happened? Why did I pause to read this nondescript book's title, A Good Scent from a Strange Mountain? I read the blurb on the back cover. It is the Vietnamese voice that Butler seeks, and that in these stories he has so remarkably and movingly found. An interesting coincidence, as I've recently watched Ken Burns' documentary on Vietnam. Butler's book contains 15 stories, each narrated in a different voice. As a writer, this intrigues me. What holds it together? I keep reading and come to a line from the back cover that seems a perfectly timed response to an email my sister Gretchen sent me today from Laos. Another coincidence. Gretchen describes a serene sunset ride on the Nam Sung River with green, misted mountains rising above the water on either side. All was peaceful until the boat rounded a bend and encountered a large and raucous crew of young Americans floating in inner tubes. They were drinking beer, tossing the empties into the river. My sister wrote, "They could have been tubing at McCoy Rapids in Virginia instead of this river in Laos." And then I read descriptions of Butler's characters, within whom, despite varied experiences and personalities, the absurdities of contemporary American pop culture and searing memories of war uneasily coexist. With my own searing memories of napalm children running towards the lens of an American camera, the scene my sister described on the Nam Sung River seems both absurd and obscene. This is what books do to me. Interrupt my forward progress towards some purpose, like this book is doing to me now. A good scent from a strange mountain has inserted itself into my consciousness. Like an uninvited guest, it has intruded, and I know will stay too long. This book is stronger than I am and more insistent. It demands attention as if I were meant to read it at exactly this time in my life. From the first sentence of the first story, I am pulled inside and cannot stop reading. I've enjoyed and admired many books the past few years, but this one feels special. Each story different and remarkable, each a small jewel. But there's something else I don't understand, which is why I had to write about it. A Vietnamese refugee, resettled and successful in Louisiana, drives to the airport in Houston to bring back his wife's grandfather. She hasn't seen him since she fled Vietnam 2 decades earlier. Her husband describes what he sees from the car window on the drive to Houston. Quote, "And if I was a man who believed in symbols and omens, I would have been very interested toward the end of my journey when I came to a low highway bridge. I experienced a tingling premonition of what would come next. Before reading it, I already knew the man was approaching a bridge that I too had crossed once in my life. Like this Vietnamese man, when I reached the bridge, the perplexing poetry of its name startled me. Lost and Old Rivers. This happened 45 years ago. After I had graduated from Wisconsin, ended an 8-month marriage, moved to Massachusetts, gotten a graduate degree, and taught in Colorado. Now I was returning to Louisiana to start a job at Country Day School in New Orleans. Everything I owned fit inside my VW Bug. Still, I had room for a passenger, a boy heading to Houston to visit his family. His parents were hospitable. I stayed the night. The next morning, a sunny day in August of 1973, I continued my journey home to Louisiana, enjoying the changing views from my car window. I came to a low highway bridge that took me across the wide converging of 2 rivers. As I approached the bridge and read Lost and Old Rivers, I knew it had meaning. In all the decades since I passed that Texas bridge, it has followed me, whispering some secret I could never understand. Though I've talked about it many times, never had I encountered another, old or young, who had crossed the bridge. Never another traveler who might also have wondered how a river could lose its way. It's the young who get lost. Today, for the first time, I think I understand. This book reached for me. I was seeking a map that doesn't exist for my next journey. Just when I felt lost and old, a book rescued me, as books have throughout my life. If nothing else, and there's always more, they tell me I'm not alone. Others have experienced this. I don't know what lies on the other side of this bridge, but I will cross it. Perhaps, like rivers, we are meant to keep on flowing. Maybe there's no such thing as lost unless we stop moving. Though I'm a little afraid of what lies on the other side of this new life bridge, I know I have to cross it. Life's natural flow is toward the house of tomorrow. Perhaps it will be beautiful. Perhaps it will feel like home. Thank you.
Our next writer is Charlotte Morgan. Charlotte holds an MFA from Virginia Commonwealth University and is a Pushcart Prize recipient. For over 20 years, she has been writer-in-residence at Nimrod Hall Summer Arts Program. Charlotte says, "I have been inspired to write my whole life by the events and people around me. It's a wonder and a mystery that each of us is drawn to single out from the overwhelming amount of sensory input, unique experiences that latch onto our imaginations." The poem Excavating was inspired by digging into childhood memories at the same time I must prepare my stuff for my adult children to sort through after I'm gone. Charlotte Morgan reading Excavating.
Thank you, Diane. I knew she was a gracious hostess and MC, but I didn't know she was a wizard. I feel very connected to read after Jane. My poem is called Excavating. There are two references in here that perhaps some of you don't know. One is leggings. I doubt the young people know about leggings because I don't see them anymore, and my children didn't wear them. But as a girl, I had to wear dresses. And so when we went outside in the cold, we had to put on our leggings, which you pulled up and put the suspenders over you, and they were woolen and scratchy and not much fun to wear, and I hated mine, but there you go, that was the times. Another reference is to the Virginia Museum that had a room that was like a diorama of an invaded tomb, and there was a mummy in it. And I thought that was just fascinating. So those are two references in this poem. Excavating. In leggings, mittens with crusty red noses, me, my brothers, and the neighbor kids spent wintry afternoons digging with spoons to unearth this mysterious stone formation. What was it? Some natural thing created by Lord Jesus? Or an alien object split deep into the earth from outer space? Or even a sealed coffin, a tomb, or a heavy box of treasure? In school, we'd learned about the mummies, gone to see the robbed grave at the museum, peeking deep into dark, wide eyes adjusting, silent when the blurred body came clear. For years, my diary hidden from prying eyes. I told its secrets, buried them. Who might unearth it, find out about my forbidden boyfriend, our tiptoes quiet in the hallway, his furtive kisses down there. What to do with buried things before we die? We could attach them to wills, divisive codicils, or give them to Goodwill, or maybe like retinas, donate them for strangers to see when we no longer can. Or leave them hidden for curious grown children to find. In pitch dark, I startle, can't breathe. Last night, the night before, digging through night terrors, I wake, trembling. Thank you.
Our next writer is Guy Sims. Guy Sims is a 12-year resident of Blacksburg. A longtime writer and poet, Guy is the author of the novel Living Just a Little, head writer for the Brother Man comic book series, and the Brother Man graphic novel Revelation. Author of the detective series, The Cold Hard Cases of Duke Denham. In January 2018, his works with the Brotherman series were archived at the Smithsonian National Museum on African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. Here is Guy Sims reading On the Beach.
What's not true is that this poem was inspired by one fish, two fish. The truth is, a young man in Philadelphia who applied to be a park ranger, who wanted to be a park ranger in the city of Philadelphia, downtown, was assigned to Sandy Hook, New Jersey, to work on a beach, of which I had no experience of the beach. But with today's weather, as Diane pointed out, it should inspire you to want to be on the beach. And so here we are on the beach. From New York skyline to the Seabright Bridge, they stand, sit, swim, randomly scattered, consciously oblivious to each other, frying themselves in scented oils, bopping and bouncing to the Beach Boys and the Beatles, while sipping on an ice-cold Bud, or soda, or a tea drink, crackerjacking, hot dog, and ice creaming and dippity-dooing in the ocean. Hello, high tide, and a shell is washed into your pants. The summer sun beating down, not a gray cloud in the sky. Laughter, singing, chewing fat, pretty girls in psychedelic polka-dotted pinstripe skin-tight swimwear. Handsome men in macho-fied armor, both being inconspicuously conspicuous. The atmosphere is hotter than the sand. Tomorrow don't come for a long time when you're on the beach. Thank you.
Our next reader and writer is Elizabeth Chavez. Elizabeth is currently a stay-at-home mom to 1-year-old Nicholas, the possibly more boisterous member of today's audience. Is Nicholas back there? Yes, he is. We have 2 young men with our audience today. Previously, she taught political science and planning at Vassar and Virginia Tech. And prior to that, a long time ago, she briefly practiced law. But now she realizes what a cakewalk all that was compared to being a mom and trying to write fiction. She thanks Nicholas for being a good napper and giving her some time for the latter. Here is Elizabeth Chavez reading All the Weight Lifted.
weight lifted. The man wore expensive shoes, and he hadn't asked Jeremiah to help him get the timber down. He'd commanded it. Jeremiah had long ago learned that only people who have power can give orders. Everyone else can merely whine, plead, or persuade. And when people with power tell you to do something, they don't have to raise their voice or change their tone. They just say it. And the man had just said, "Get that down for me," the same way he would have said, "Looks like rain." The pallet of cedar boards was up on the third shelf, and Jeremiah was going to need the lift to reach it. He himself was in charge of the dead birds at the home improvement store. They flew in through the automatic sliding doors and perched themselves in the rafters, unable to find their way back out. Sometimes he had the opportunity to try catching one that had chosen a lower roost. But most of the time, if not practically all of the time, he scooped up dead birds and dumped them in the trash. He remembered the first time he'd felt a bird swoop past while he was unloading a pallet on the order picker in aisle 9, the whoosh and flutter of wings. The small thing came to rest a couple shelves away, eyeing him curiously. A sparrow, he thought, although he didn't know birds that well. This one was mostly gray, and he always thought small birds like that looked like balloons blown up almost to bursting, the way their chests puffed out so. He'd felt wonder then, him and the bird together in this cavernous place that otherwise seemed so empty of life. And it reminded him, if only for a moment, that joy could still exist. He thinks that one escaped, but soon he began to find the dead ones, the tiny bodies lying on the cold concrete floor. It was his job to get rid of them before the customers arrived. He didn't like dropping them straight into the dumpster, watching them mingle with all the packing material, that little bit of softness amongst everything else so stiff and unforgiving. So he tried to save boxes that would fit, which was hard in a place like this, where everything was so big. He didn't like using the lift to get merchandise down, and on the rare occasion, when a bird had made its final resting place on an upper shelf, he'd simply climbed one of the store ladders to retrieve it. It was technically called a reach truck, and Clark, a guy 20 years younger, was in charge of training all the other employees on how to use it. Jeremiah had been trained when he first started working there some 2 years back, and he'd only had to use the truck a handful of times since. Other employees stepped in for him willingly. Sometimes they insisted. But Jeremiah looked up and down the aisle now, and no one else was in sight. The man had his little girl with him. She was maybe 10, but still wore her blonde hair in pigtails, and had one hand resting in the bottom of her father's pants pocket. "Sure, I just need to get the lift," Jeremiah told the man. He kept standing there, though, for a moment, and the man began to look over his shoulder. People often did that, looked past him. "I've got to be somewhere," the man said, and he glanced at his watch to emphasize the fact. Jeremiah thought the watch looked expensive too, the way it imposed on the man's wrist, but he was no expert. "What are the boards for?" Jeremiah asked. The little girl said something, but Jeremiah couldn't make it out. He leaned toward her, giving her his good ear. She smiled before repeating, "A playhouse." Jeremiah smiled back. He would be 66 next month, not that anyone would know, but the date would mark a number of milestones. His 2-year anniversary at work, his 3rd year clean, and his 10th year alone. He lived in an apartment over a detached garage. Laura, the woman that owned the house, had recently divorced before he moved in. The apartment had been her husband's study. Other than a bathroom, there wasn't much to it. Slowly, over the last 2 years, he'd made the place more comfortable, installing a small kitchen, building a loft for his bed, adding shelves and a room divider. One evening, he watched a TV show on tiny houses and felt in tune with the times. "And what will you have in your tiny home?" he asked the little girl. She smiled again, eager to share her secret. And Jeremiah was happy to see the man's patience extend at least to his child. She opened her mouth wide to speak, then looked to her father as if he served as a reminder. The note of excitement in her voice flattened. "Oh, just shells, rocks, and other things." "I bet you'll need lots of room for those," Jeremiah said. "Yes, lots," she agreed, with an air of practicality. "The world is full of wonders. I've collected many myself." "I bet you have," the father interrupted. "Find many around here?" Jeremiah wanted to tell her about the small titmouse he found yesterday. He's pretty sure that was the species. He'd stuck it in the wide pocket of his orange apron, because directly after finding it, he'd been overtaken by the need to pee. Scuttling to the bathroom, he felt the bird bobbing against him. After he relieved himself, he looked down into the pocket and imagined the bird was sleeping. He almost couldn't throw that one out. He had a strong urge to take it home and keep it. But he couldn't picture himself driving home with the bird sitting on the front seat of his truck or stuffed inside his glove box. And at home, he couldn't think where he'd keep the thing. No place but the freezer would work, else it would go all squishy. It made no sense to hide the bird away, because then why bring it home at all? He was no taxidermist, and he didn't want the bird stuffed. It wasn't right to keep something immortal like that, fixed for perpetuity, or at least until it molded or disintegrated to dust. Standing there in the bathroom, under the fluorescent bulbs, with the stinging smell of urinal cake in his nose, he decided to flush it. He thought it was small enough to fit. And for some reason, a water burial seemed more suitable. He saw the bird floating down a river somewhere, amidst lit candles and roses. It would be evening, the last remnants of sunlight making the water glow. The light of the candles, barely distinguishable, as if they weren't meant to burn, and the little tit on its back, drifting along at peace, its beak set in something like a smile. When he clocked off for the day and pulled his apron over his head, he sneezed, and a tiny feather floated up. He caught it in his hand, a thing that existed clear to him but had no weight. He closed his eyes and tried to detect its tickle on his palm. When he opened them, his hand was empty, the feather blown away in the air conditioner's current. The store kept the break room too cold. "Let's get on with it," the man said, stepping between his daughter and Jeremiah. He didn't look angry, but Jeremiah could see the tension in his arm, an arm that was now latched onto his daughter's shoulder. "Sure," Jeremiah said. "Let me just see where I can find a truck." "Isn't that one there?" The man was sort of stooped and looking past the first shelf to the next aisle. Jeremiah could see the familiar bright red of the lift's body. "What do you know?" he said, and he smiled at the little girl again. "I have a granddaughter your age." "Jesus," the man said, "get the truck." Some 40 years ago, he'd hitched overland to northern India with a fellow freak, the hippie trail they came to call it. Drinking a bang lassie on the river's shore, the air heavy with incense, Jeremiah observed an arti ceremony. The candles in their flower cups flowed past, all those wishes, there and then gone, as transient as him. And he remembered the vultures, waiting in the trees as they crossed into India, marking the border like sentries, keeping watch for the dead, but welcoming him too, like the local innkeepers, happy for the trade. Those memories belonged to a different world, one he'd found and tried to keep, but couldn't. Jeremiah couldn't delay any longer, so he left the man and his girl and made a point of walking like he was in a hurry. He only hoped that he'd run into another employee on his way to the next aisle. But it was a Tuesday evening, and the store was short-staffed. Usually, Jeremiah preferred these quiet times. Aisle after aisle, all bleeding together, the low hum of the HVAC machinery, the smooth floor under his feet, the presence of absence echoing in his ears. He rounded the empty aisle and saw the lift waiting for him, its long arms at rest. He fished in his pocket for the key ring his manager had given him when he was first employed, and he started the machine up. It moved effortlessly, making an efficient turn as he pointed its bulk down the row. But it moved without motion, gliding onward, belying its 2-ton weight. Not like the elephants that lumbered, the ones he'd seen crossing the river, their heavy bodies rising and falling, pushing through the water until it became deep enough that it pulled them. And then all that weight lifted, carrying them along to the other side. He rode the reach truck at a snail's pace, afraid to make it go any faster, and glimpsed the little girl watching him from beneath the next aisle. He felt silly standing in its cab, like someone on parade, someone more important than him. He missed a bird once. It had made its final resting place on a carpet sample, and its slight, speckled brown body had blended into the rug's mottled pattern. A young boy found it, and Jeremiah watched him stand there weeping. He must have been almost 10, about this little girl's age, too old to cry like that in public over something like a dead bird. He often wondered what was happening in that boy's life to make him cry so. Jeremiah didn't want to interrupt him for fear of embarrassing him, and he had no comforting words to offer. Eventually, the boy moved on. On the side of the garage, with Laura's permission, he dug a bed 2 feet by 9. He thought about planting tomatoes and climbing sweet peas, but had settled on sunflowers. Full grown, they dwarfed him. Their strong stalks arced toward the sun, danced in the wind, and drooped on cold mornings. They emoted the way his own body had when he was young and still flexible. Now he stood there stiffly, traversing an eternity to get to his destination. The little girl was waiting for her playhouse, planked in cedar, a splendid abode for her germinating dreams. Jeremiah would have liked to plant sunflowers for her there, their tall heads reaching skyward, making an offering to the passing birds. Her father didn't seem like the kind of man who cared for flowers, but then Jeremiah often got people wrong. It had never bothered him that much before, when life was something you could coast, when blows were more easily absorbed. "Here we are," he said, careful to stop the reach truck clear of the man and his daughter. "Finally," the man said. "If you could give me a little more room here, I'll get that right down," Jeremiah told him. The man backed his daughter up a few feet, but only moved himself a couple inches. Jeremiah carefully maneuvered the lift close to the shelf, then slowly raised the arms. The man had pulled a cell phone from his pocket and was busy typing something into it. His daughter's round face looked up at Jeremiah expectantly. He inserted the arms into the pallet, trying to remember Clark's instructions, remembering something about balancing the weight. The pallet wasn't stacked high, but there was a fair amount of timber on it. The man was on the phone now, speaking with someone. "Yeah, I'm stuck at the home improvement store. They've got senior citizens operating the heavy machinery. No telling when I'm getting out of here." Jeremiah forgot to check whether the lumber was banded together. That had been something Clark had overemphasized, as the store had been sued when a stack of aluminum siding slipped down on a customer out in the yard. Jeremiah was too busy, taking in the sight of a small owl perched on the back of the pallet. Its eyes closed in sleep, he was sure. Thank you.
Next, we have Kate Bast reading her poem, To the Bird of Paradise, Blooming Next to the Motel 6. She says, my poem came out of deep wonder over the thriving of such radical beauty, blooming in the middle of a concrete jungle of a mix of neon-crazy lit buildings, some seedy, in Culver City, California, where I resided when I was working on my MFA in creative writing. Much of my poetry is based in the belief that the force of wild creativity and love resides in all our natural environment. Giving voice to the sacred stories of these elements is my passion as a poet and is the undercurrent of much of my work. Kate Bast.
I just realized I have a scary color contrast in my background. So if you're on psychotropic medications or anything else, you might want to close your eyes. Anyway. To the bird of paradise blooming next to the Motel 6. Neon lit and lewdly cleft, brazen in your billows, displaying your pollen for any old passing bird or bee. The nuns warned me about you. Must you jolt me, fuchsia, on this smog-gray day? Oh, bemused one, bedded midst biggie gulps and menthol butts, plasto grass and urine spray. Pray, open your craned beak mouth and explain your lush. You disturb LA urbanity with your beauty spike. You pierce my cement contentment. You open wide my giant green sesame. Oh, holy harlot bloom, would we but worship, plunge, and sip the fertile of your depths. A riot, I tell you, coming to our senses.
Our next poem, The Snapping of the Stick, is by Aaron Lee Moore. Aaron can't be with us today, so Jen Goad, Associate Editor for Floyd County Moonshine Literary Magazine, will be reading Aaron Lee Moore's poem. Aaron grew up in Floyd and is the founder and editor-in-chief of the local literary magazine, Floyd County Moonshine, which is a beautiful magazine, by the way. Anyone interested in submitting or subscribing should go to the website, floydcountymoonshine.com. Here is Jen Goad.
The snapping of the stick. I killed a baby duckling before knowing ducks could die. Threw him up in the air, ecstatically, above the blue plastic pool, till after a while he was gasping, then slowed, then still. I ran down the gravel driveway and kept running, till my sister caught up to me, bringing me back, sobbing. It came to me in a dream that night, deformed, bat wings, unfeathered, buried not far from the rusted red gate, after the grave was filled with only a few handfuls of dirt, the stark silence. Then, out of primeval compulsion, I snapped a stick and laid it gently on top.
Lisa Ress is our next writer. Lisa grew up in Chicago and upstate New York, but has lived most of her life in Southwest Virginia. She has published poems in a whole bunch of tiny literary magazines and managed to find publishers for 2 books of poetry. Nature has been her inspiration, though these days, contemplating it causes her to feel worried and sad. Lisa Ress reading It Is Prague.
Thank you all for coming. I will explain that this poem comes out of my family. Some of them got out of Vienna as Jews in time, and some of them didn't. And I went back to Vienna with my mother, and I was amazed at how beautiful the city is. It's all Baroque. And I understand that I've never been to Prague, but that Prague is the same way, the architecture. I was stunned by the contrast of the beauty and the awful things that the people who lived there had done. And so, this poem. It is Prague, and along the roof's edges, lines of stone bodies twist upward. Every parapet a stage, every dream a suitcase. We travelers unpack. It is Prague, those stone bodies hard as ancient marzipan, the churches dimpled and domed as dollops of beaten cream. How full the streets are of the invisible footprints that march in a single direction, then disappear. How many lives cling to the yellowish faces of houses that line the streets. It is Prague, a garden of chiseled stone wreaths. We have come here to gather for ourselves and so many others bouquets made of slate and of marble, of sandstone and bullet-chipped brick. It is Zagreb, Mogadishu, Sarajevo, or it is Prague. Along the roof's edges, lines of sight, stony lines, every parapet a staging ground, every dream a cartridge opening into torn flesh. It is Little Rock, Chicago, Kabul, stone bodies everywhere, holy places filled with the echoes of streets, thick with the invisible black of footprints that cling to the crumbling faces of houses and crowd this unending dream. Thank you.
Our final reader of the day is Nancy Leach. She says, after a career spent in reading student writing and writing academic papers, retirement means that I can now read novels and write whatever I want, be it bits of memoir, opinion essays, an occasional poem, descriptions of people, places, and things that have meaning for me, or any combination of the above. Here is Nancy Leach reading Parenting.
Most of us, this is called parenting, by the way, most of us, I think, tend to parent the way we were parented. I say most of us because I'm sure that there are some who were parented in such abusive or neglectful ways that they vow to treat their children in exactly the opposite manner. But for those of us who were parented decently, I think that our own parents form the template that we will follow when we have children of our own. I think that this influence explains why we sometimes hear our parents' words coming out of our own mouths. I know this is true for me. My parents were in their 40s when my brother and I were born. So they tended to parent the two of us the way grandparents might, with a lot of freedom and leeway. Spoiled, my older brothers and sisters called it. And my mother's mother had died when she was only 8 years old. So I've always thought that she knew how to parent us up to the age of 8, but had no clue what to do after that. So she pretty much let us be. The effect that this laissez-faire parenting had on me became clear on a particular day when my younger son was about 16 or 17. Gabe had been in one garage band or another all through high school. The current incarnation, which was named Blend, had become quite successful, to the point that they had gigs both close to home and at some distance. One day, he and his bandmate Kevin asked if they could borrow my car to move some amps and other sound equipment from our house to a local venue where they had an engagement that night. I was sitting at the dining room table, doing my monthly bill paying and checkbook balancing, deciding which bills to pay and which could wait. I knew that I was going to be busy with this project for at least a couple of hours and wouldn't be needing the car, so I was happy to agree. They proceeded to make several trips in and out of the house, moving items of equipment, and I was lost in numbers and planning and budgeting. After a while, the bustle of the schlepping quieted down, and after a prolonged silence, both boys came back into the house with their heads hanging and stood across the table from me. It took them a few minutes to spit it out, but eventually they were able to tell me that they had miscalculated the slant of the hatch door on my Tercel wagon, and when they slammed it down, the corners of 2 amps that were wedged in completely shattered the back window. At this point, they illustrated the situation by shaking little pellets of safety glass from their hair and clothes. Now, I had my mouth open to react with an indignant motherly rant about irresponsibility and how much things cost, when somehow my mind flashed back to an incident that had occurred about 40 years before, around the same dining room table when it was in our family summer cottage. My brother and I were maybe 14 and 16, still spending all of every summer with my parents at our cottage on Cape Cod. We were both very avid fishermen at that time. Our most prized possessions were our tackle boxes, whose little compartments contained a wealth of sinkers, swivels, leaders, bobbers, various sizes of hooks, and my favorite, the little shiny lures, shaped like little demi-tasse spoons in silver, gold, and various colors. We fished mostly from the shore, catching perch, sunfish, and the occasional pickerel or bass, and we never kept what we caught. It was all about the thrill of that little nibble and the subsequent strong tug on the line. My dad was also into fishing at the time, but his preference was to troll from our canoe with one of us, usually me, paddling. He would yell out directions. Get close to those weeds. No, not that close. Paddle over to that cove. No, faster. Turn right. No, left. See where that fish jumped? Get us over there. This was exhausting and exasperating for me. It seemed that no matter how I tried, I couldn't suit him as a chauffeur. So when my brother got the idea that my dad should buy a small motor for the canoe, I was all for it. It took a couple of months for us to convince our dad that this motor thing was a good idea. Having survived the Depression, he was not one to spend money frivolously. Witness the fact that our canoe was an Army surplus Grumman that he had picked up for a song. This is the way he did things. If he couldn't make something that he wanted, he would buy it used or trade something for it. And to ask him to spend money on something as frivolous as fishing made it a really hard sell. But we finally wore him down, and he shelled out the $120 for the motor. Just a little 2 or 3 horsepower one, perfect for the canoe. On the particular day that I flashed back to, several of us were sitting around the same dining room table that I was now using for an office, playing cards after lunch. My brother had set off sometime earlier to take the motor on its maiden voyage. We were having our usual hilarity in a rousing game of hearts when my brother stomped up the front steps of the cottage, across the porch, and into the main room. Red-faced and trembling, he marched over to where my dad was sitting, pulled out his wallet, peeled off 3 $20 bills, and threw them down on the table in front of my dad. "There," he barked. "I'll pay back the rest later." When he calmed down enough, he explained that he had taken the canoe with its shiny new motor out to the middle of Great Pond. When he made a sharp turn, he realized that he had not attached the safety chain from the motor to the boat, as the whole motor came loose and fell off into 60 feet of water, irretrievable. And then he left the room. I'd been sitting across from my dad while my brother recited his tale of woe, and I'd watched him keep his head down and his eyes fixed intently on his hand of cards, his lips twitching as he tried hard not to laugh. As soon as my brother was out of earshot, he just let the laughter roll until he about fell off his chair. So on this day, 40 years later, the whole scenario flashed back to me in the space of about 30 seconds, and I just started to roar with laughter. I couldn't catch my breath, and every time I tried to talk, I just found myself laughing harder. This went on for several minutes, and Gabe and his friend Kevin had no idea what was going on, thinking, I suppose, that they had finally pushed me over the edge. Only after an extended period of time could I explain that they had been saved from my wrath
by Gabe Scrampy and the dining room table. Kevin thought Gabe was really lucky to have a mother like me. And oh, to finish the other story, there was never any mention made of replacing the drowned motor. So I resumed the thankless job of paddling my dad around as he trolled. And yes, my brother did eventually repay the entire cost of the motor. He kept track of his debt in pencil on the window frame above his bed on the porch. It began, "I owe Dad $60. And then various amounts were subtracted until the total read $0. This bit of history in graphite was still there 30 years later when the cottage was finally sold.
I think all our writers and readers deserve another hand. Jerry Rogers just brought me this. Isn't it gorgeous? This is the new 2018 Artemis Literary Magazine. And we talked about it before. Are there any tickets left for the launch? Okay.
Tickets available.
And tell me again how to get to the tickets, because I went to the website and then I pushed blog, and that's how I got it. Is that correct?
Okay. Hi. There are different ways. If you go to the Taubman Museum, then you click on events, and May 4th is the Artemis launch, and the calendar will scroll down. You could click on that and it'll say purchase your tickets, and they're affordable for $8, $12, if you want to get really generous and support us, $40 and $50. And that's one way. And then on our Artemis Journal website, we have, on our blog, we talk about how to buy a ticket. So it's going to be a great night. We hope to see you guys.
Yes, and these will be for sale, right?
Yes, these are hot off the press. They're the most beautiful ones we've ever done. 200 pages, great writing in there, great art, and Women Hold Up Half the Sky really hit the target. We were swamped by submissions this year. We had over 1,000 submissions.
Good for them.
So it's a beautiful book. We're very proud of it. So we hope that you'll purchase it and come to the lunch. Thank you.
For people,
Oh.
the subscription information is inside.
Okay, and Floyd County Moonshine.
That's the most recent.
Literary magazine.
Nothing inside that.
Oh.
Floyd Shine is.
It's just the most recent issue
Yeah, it's
to
most
look
recent.
at, yeah.
And you can...
But all the subscription stuff's on the website, like she said earlier.
Right, Floyd County Moonshine, alloneword.com. And you can submit and also purchase these beautiful books. They also have scenes photographed in Floyd County, and you have to tell where you photographed it to get into the magazine. So I think that's really cool. So 2 wonderful books for you to submit to and think about buying for yourself. Thank you so much for coming. It's been just a wonderful evening. I've enjoyed it. Afternoon, enjoyed it so much. Please help yourself to refreshments. And as for coffee, Valley Voices has donated some money so you can get free coffee in the library just through the doors and to the right. Thank you so much.
Okay.